Well, here's a video that I started 2 years ago and never completed. Been really feeling the arcade stuff of late and decided I'd take a stab getting this one out there. A long ways back, probably 2 years ago, I did a video on converting a Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition board over to a turbo board. It's just really a simple 2-chip swap. Take 2 off, put 2 on. It's super easy. You can probably buy those 2 chips, or hell, if you're doing arcade work, you should probably get yourself a burner, and then you can do stuff like this yourself. Burners are also nice for reburning original chips. Sometimes these things are so old that they'll end up with what some call bit rot, and you can fix that by erasing and rewriting the chip from a known dump in a main set. Why I really brought this up though was Champion Edition. That has long been my definitive version of Street Fighter 2. I've talked a little bit in the past about why that is, and to cut to the chase on the reason, it's mostly nostalgia driven. It's not because it's technically the best version, I know it isn't, but damn it, I just really love Champion Edition. So you might say, in some regards, once the dust settled on Champion Edition, I started waiting for the real sequel, Street Fighter 3. And all of you out there know it would be a long-ass wait for that. We had Supers, Turbos, Alphas, and even a Versus tossed at us for half of a goddamn decade before Street Fighter 3 finally graced arcades in 1997. And at that point, even Capcom was kind of in on arcade players' belaboring question of, where is 3? Now, if you were playing in the 90s, you said that phrase and you heard it asked, where's 3? Can you believe 3 isn't out yet? And so when Capcom rolled it out, they didn't even need the Street Fighter title on the marquee, they just put 3 on it, almost as a nod to the question that players had been asking for years. This was a big moment, and I know Street Fighter 3, the first release, isn't discussed too much these days, but I have to tell you, it was a big fucking deal to finally see the true sequel to the greatest fighting game of all time standing tall in your hometown arcade. Okay, so I'm done trying to make you feel warm and fuzzy about this game like I do. You're either there or you're not, and that's okay. My point being, nostalgia runs deep for me on this one, and so once I had a JAMA arcade in my house, 3 was on my shopping list. My go-to JAMA machine in this case is of course my Sega Astro City, tried and true, now fitted with Seimitsu sticks and buttons, and oh yeah, it has a gorgeously sharp and bright monitor that just had its chassis cleaned up and recapped for years of authentic CRT magic to come. Street Fighter 3 arrived in arcades on Capcom's brand new hardware, the CPS3. Another fighting game called Red Earth was the first to use the CPS3 board, but details and all that. That was almost like a test run for Capcom so that this hardware could then showcase Street Fighter 3. I know, someone out there loves Red Earth and is just irritated I referred to it as a testing project, so go ahead, unload in the comments, I'll take a look and maybe revisit it at some point in the future. So much like the CPS2, the CPS3 has some anti-piracy measures built in. This time it comes in the form of a cartridge. This cartridge contains a CPU as well as a special key that is used to decrypt the game as it is run from the board's memory. So how does the game get to the board's memory? Each board came with a fancy SCSI CD-ROM and a CD game disc. When you turn on the board, the data is copied from the CD into the board's memory. From there, the cartridge we just looked at uses a unique key to decrypt the game and run it. Now, if you mess with the cart, you run the risk of it suiciding, which then means your keys are gone and you've just rendered your game useless. Even if you innocently allow the battery inside the cart to die, the keys are then gone, and you are left with one expensive paperweight. A lot of you guys kind of sense what's coming here, so I don't think I'm shocking anyone when I say I'm not really overly concerned about a suicided cart outside of preservation's sake. I did have the battery in this original cart swapped out for a new one to ensure that it doesn't die, so I could run it as original hardware if I really wanted to. But of course, to no one's surprise, I'm not going to be using the original security cart here in the modern day. Darksoft has created a nice reproduction cartridge that houses his Super BIOS, which allows for all CPS3 games to be loaded and played on original hardware. The key to the magic behind this has to do with Street Fighter 3 Second Impact using a default set of encryption keys. Now, I'm not going to pretend I understand and explain the details of this, but essentially the Darksoft BIOS behaves as the one from a Second Impact cart, and he then converted the remaining 5 games to be compatible with said Second Impact BIOS. If you're wondering, you can in fact pull the battery from a CPS3 cartridge, which renders it dead like we talked about earlier, but then soldering in the Darksoft Super BIOS will allow it to work as a multi-cart. So if you already have a dead cartridge, this might be a good way to go. So those converted games I just mentioned need to be downloaded and either burned to a CD to work in the stock SCSI CD-ROM, or you can get rid of spinning discs and moving parts and get yourself a SCSI to SD adapter. There's a little bit of finagling to get this to work. Thankfully, I didn't have near the difficulty as others appeared to, but yeah, my CD-ROM is now replaced and I have CPS3 games loaded to the SD card. I'm almost ready to go. The last thing to mention before I boot this up is the onboard memory where these games will be written to. You need to have 4 128 megabyte SIMs and 2 64 megabyte SIMs installed on your CPS3 motherboard for the Super BIOS to work. This is the same amount of memory required to run Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Since my board was a stock new generation setup, I didn't have enough memory to run this setup initially. This is probably best shown visually on this chart from Arcade Otaku. Basically, you need to look at what memory you currently have installed and then assess your deficit based on what is needed to run Third Strike. Hunting down original memory SIMs can be either a waiting game, costly, or both. Thankfully, Darksoft recognized this and created reproduction SIMs for those of us in need of upgrading the memory on our boards. Like the Super BIOS cart, you can purchase additional memory SIMs from him. Alright, with the right amount of memory, our CPS3 Super BIOS cart, and our games loaded onto SD, we are finally ready to play. Now you'll notice that when I switch things on, I'm giving the opportunity to select which region I want to use for my games. But afterwards, Third Strike boots right up, and that's because I have previously loaded it into the memory. Third Strike will stay in memory and boot almost instantly each time I turn the board on and off. I suspect for most of you, this is the game you'll spend most of your time with in the CPS3 library. If you do want to switch games, you need to press the first player button upon startup in order to bring up the Darksoft menu. From there, you can select a new game to write to memory and play. I will warn you now though, this is perhaps the one negative to the CPS3 setup. Writing a new game can take a while, upwards of 40 minutes in some cases. So this isn't like the CPS2 multi where you just pick a new game and flash it in a matter of 30 seconds or so. If you want to switch games, you really need to commit to it. So this is my beloved CPS3 setup. Some of you may have noticed I don't have a shell over my Super BIOS cartridge. It's just the PCB inserted into the slot. I just never got around to getting one, and really I question whether I even needed it, as the whole board is pretty well protected with the stock metal casing. I feel pretty fortunate to have that metal shell. It may not be the prettiest thing, but it is original and it has that built to withstand arcade appeal to it. There are some really nice custom cases you can get for your CPS3 too, however, just something to give it more protection and an overall better look. I'll close things out by mentioning an unpopular opinion. You know how I mentioned I'm not a huge fan of anything Street Fighter 2 after Champion Edition? Well, for me, Second Impact is the definitive version of Street Fighter 3. And again, I know Third Strike is technically the, quote, better game, but it really is almost verging on being a different title entirely. It did come out more than 2 years after the original release of Street Fighter 3, whereas Second Impact was on the heels of the original release by just 6 or 7 months, I think. So to me, Second Impact is the Champion Edition of Street Fighter 3, if that makes sense. Third Strike is no doubt a phenomenal title in its own right. I feel like it's something completely different than the game I was initially wowed by as a high school senior. Second Impact retains the charm and subtlety that I loved when I first played 3, without going too over-the-top crazy with an onslaught of new designs, mechanics, characters, and presentation. Sometimes I'm a less is more guy, and so if you were wondering, Street Fighter 3 Second Impact is my favorite CPS3 game. Thanks so much for watching today, guys, and wow, was this a long one. Kudos if you hung in there for the entire ride. Thanks so much for watching another arcade-related video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.